warmly welcome to this seminar arranged by Hanaholmen, Swedish-Finnish Cultural Center, Swedish Defence Association and Swedish-Finnish Cultural Foundation. My name is Minu Sadigpour. I'm a board member at the Swedish Defence Association, senior consultant for total defence that foresees strategies, and a huge fan of Hanaholmen. So I'm very delighted to be the moderator at this seminar today. To my help to discuss today's highly interesting topic, Sweden, Finland and NATO's changing strategic posture in the Nordic-Baltic region, I have a highly distinguished panel. General Mikael Claesson, Chief of the Defence Staff, Swedish Armed Forces. Joakim Salonen, Defence Attaché of Finland in Sweden, Finnish Embassy. Tony Lawrence, Research Fellow, International Center for Defence and Security Studies. And Stefan Wallin, former Minister of Defence, Swedish-Finnish Cultural Foundation. Warmly welcome to the panel.
Thank you. Thank you.
With that said, I would like to open up the seminar by turning to you, General Claesson, Chief of the Defence Staff. This seminar is taking place in the island of Gotland. What can we say about the strategic importance of Gotland in Sweden and NATO's defence planning?
Oh, thank you, Minu. It's a lot. I'm not sure we have time, but because of that, I have brought with me a map, and everybody who knows me know that I use maps a lot. And we've been working hard on this map to display some of the interdependencies and interlinkages between the countries in the Baltic Sea region, and that's exactly what you can see. Without going through all the details, you can see some of the sea lines of communication highlighted, some of the land transportation routes, which are also highlighted, as well as underwater seabed infrastructure. And having said that, you can see that there is a high intensity of sea traffic in the Baltic Sea region. And based on that, I would like to say that 40 to 50% of all Russian sea trade is going in and out of the Baltic Sea. We have the Baltic Sea Fleet, which is still relevant as a military factor, regardless of what is going on in Ukraine. So in that sense, I would say that Gotland, as a kind of an unsinkable carrier in the middle of the Baltic Sea, will and is already playing quite an important role. Not the only feature, of course, in the Baltic Sea region, but a very important one. But looking ahead, I would say that with Swedish NATO membership, the Baltic Sea will turn into a kind of a NATO Mare Nostrum, which will, of course, create a lot of new possibilities to keep track on what's going on, and will force, not the least, other actors to act accordingly.
General, what can we say about the future? If I understand you right, Gotland will continue to be a strategic, important part of NATO and Sweden and Finland's defense planning. Is that correct?
I would say so, yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. We will come back to you. Turning to Joakim, how can Sweden and Finland continue to walk hand in hand and take stands for Nordic and Baltic security, even though Finland now is a full member of NATO and Sweden is not? It's quite a tricky question.
I was so hoping to get a chance to congratulate Sweden and General Claesson, that I highly respect, and I have an honor to work during the last years for the NATO membership. Unfortunately not, but between the countries, Finland and Sweden, we have come a long way for our defense cooperation, and that will continue no matter what. So it's easy to answer. There is a lot to do.
I'm happy to hear.
Of course, and of course, I also like the maps. The regional conflict, I can't see any possibilities that no one around the Baltic Sea region would not be affected if something happens.
Can we say something? I mean, if I understand you correctly, Sweden and Finland will continue to walk hand in hand. That will not change.
Well, of course, when in NATO, both countries, we will apply to the NATO regional operational planning and maybe do some changings, but I think this is a good background and basis for the future, that there is something already in place for the NATO together with Sweden, Finland, and also Norway and Denmark in the future.
General, I see you nodding. Do you agree?
I fully agree. Of course, as we have stated several times before, if the difficulties in getting on the inside of NATO will continue, of course, it will have to entail a situation where Finland must focus more on their NATO commitments. However, for the time being, I'm quite sure that we will hang on to the level of cooperation that we have already. And the level of operational planning that we already have, because that's a factor that supports us all.
So the level of friendship and standing allies will continue.
By all means.
Yes. Thank you so much. Tony, let me turn to you. What would you say that the Baltic states expect from Sweden and Finland in terms of their NATO membership?
Yeah, thank you, Minu. And let me also quickly say thank you to Hanaholmen for the invitation to participate. It's a real privilege to be here at this very famous Swedish summertime event. So thank you. What do the three Baltic states expect from Sweden and Finland in terms of their NATO membership? The very short answer is I think they're not going to expect as much as you might imagine, at least in concrete terms. But I think they also have expectations for the kind of allies that Sweden and Finland will be inside the alliance. The Baltic states have very strongly welcomed Sweden and Finland's applications and Finland's membership and Sweden's presumed membership of NATO, and that's simply because the very fact of that membership brings a completely different dynamic to the security strategic picture in the Nordic-Baltic region, and that's a dynamic that brings great benefits to the Baltic states. I'm not going to go into those benefits now because we haven't got time, but I think the degree to which those benefits are realised depends to an extent on the kind of allies that Sweden and Finland are. And I think when Sweden and Finland come into NATO, the biggest challenges that you're going to face are challenges of mindset. Sweden obviously has a very long history of neutrality, which gives it a very special position in the world. But being an ally is a different kind of identity altogether. Finland has built very strong defences. It's built very strong self-reliant defences. Being a member of a collective defence alliance is, again, a very different picture. And so I think perhaps the most important thing that Sweden and Finland can do as they join the alliance is to embrace these new identities and new roles that alliance membership brings, to recognise that NATO is not an outside actor, but it's something that we're all part of, and you will all still be part of as well. The practicalities of that, at the political level, I think it means that Sweden and Finland have to be visible, standing up for NATO, in sending deterrence messages to Russia, which is something that perhaps Finland and Sweden are not too comfortable doing at the moment. At the operational level, I think it means at least considering seriously all the things that NATO commanders want to have from you as allies. So things like basing on your territories, things like support for reinforcement routes, host nation support for reinforcement routes, taking particular roles in NATO's defence. And at the tactical level, it means using your very capable armed forces for NATO, for alliance purposes. So things like air policing, whatever comes from the deterrence arrangements from the Madrid summit, the Vilnius summit, taking part in that. I would hope that Sweden will take a leadership role in the maritime domain, and that both the new allies will look for cooperation opportunities with the Baltic states. So the expectations, I think, are not very concrete, but it's about mindset, it's about identity, and it's about taking a full part in the alliance to realise the benefits that just naturally come from Sweden and Finland's membership.
Thank you so much, Tony. Can you say, do you have any advice for Sweden and Finland regarding the mindset and about identity? I see you laughing. I will come back to you, Stefan. Don't you worry.
I don't. I mean, one of the features of the debate about accession has been people have been very keen to say that Finland and Sweden are easy to bring into NATO. They'll just plug straight in, and that's fine. But that's really about technical integration. Cultural integration is a very difficult thing altogether, and there are hundreds of consultants out there that deal with changing culture, but they would all agree that this is a difficult process. So it's not going to be a quick thing by any means.
Thank you so much. Stefan, turning to you, I was meaning to ask you what we can expect from the NATO summit in July. But first, before you answer that, please feel free to reflect upon the three former speakers and what they have been saying.
Well, First of all, I think it's good to keep in mind that what the Finnish president said on the day, the 4th of April, when Finland was became full member of NATO not too long ago. He said that the Finnish NATO membership will not be complete without Sweden, and that's of course absolutely true. And I think all Finns and all of us expect this interregnum to be as short as possible. And what's going to happen in Vilnius, we don't know, but let's see. I also think it's good to reckon that the new Finnish government has stated also that the first thing the Finland will do as new member state, based on the government program, is to promote Swedish full membership in NATO. So it's very clear message on all levels in Finnish politics. But it's not only about NATO. The Finnish government program also states that Finland will want to deepen Finnish bilateral cooperation, military cooperation, despite the NATO membership, and it's no conflict between these two, absolutely not. And the Finnish government would also like to promote Nordic cooperation within the framework of Nordefco, which is a kind of very pragmatic way of handling the military cooperation on a Nordic level. So it's not only NATO now. NATO is important, but we still also have other legs to stand on, and the bilateral cooperation with Sweden will definitely be the main focus also in the future.
That sounds great. What can we say about General's map here? What is your reflection when you watch this map, Stefan?
Well, there are lots of blue lines in it, and with a reason. And of course, it's very much about what has been mentioned earlier. The Baltic Sea will become a NATO inner sea quite soon when Swedish NATO membership is on place. And from a Gotland perspective, from an island perspective, I think there are three very interesting strategic regions or places. It's of course Bornholm. It's the Åland Islands, the militarized Åland Islands belonging to Finland, and Gotland. And Gotland is, of course, just looking at this map. Also, this map is very strategic. Who controls Gotland controls a lot of the Baltic Sea,
Yes.
the entrance to the Baltic Sea airspace, and also the maritime element. So it's a very strategic place we are on.
Please let us open up for questions. So whenever you feel like asking this distinguished panel any question related to today's topic, feel free to do so. And my colleague here will hand you a microphone. Yeah, Claes.
So a question for our Finnish participants. So what's the Finnish take on Gotland? What's your general impression of Gotland? Of course, as a Swede, we all know Åland. We go there all the time. At least I used to do in the younger years. It was easier back then. So question number one, what's your take on Gotland? And question number two, in a future Swedish NATO membership, how would you see that Gotland could be important to NATO?
Let's start with Joachim.
Okay.
Well, I would like to go back to the map, which is obvious. Gotland, it's nice in Almedalen's political week, not bad. But on the military point of view, it's a lot of meaning. And that is something I would like to stop it there.
Stefan, go ahead.
I think Michael quoted Johan Victorin earlier on, calling Gotland an unsinkable carrier, aircraft carrier, and that's very true. It's a good way of expressing this thing. And as I said earlier, who controls Gotland has a lot of, who has, for instance, modern military robot systems on Gotland can control a lot of what the Baltic Sea is all about. So from the Finnish point of view, of course, Gotland is a part of the area that we will also defend within the framework of Article 5 if when Sweden is a full member and if something happens in that direction. So it's very much also in our focus.
I have one more question, but before I do, General, what can we say about what can we do in order to strengthen Scotland even more? I know that you have taken a lot of a lot of measures to strengthen Gotland. Can we say anything more about that?
Yeah, I think the most obvious way to strengthen Gotland is to come on the inside of NATO, because that will be an instant act of deterrence in that regard. So that's probably the most important, or not probably, it is the most important part. Secondly, we have remilitarized Gotland since 2015, even though there's been a Home Guard battalion all over the time, but now also reinforced by a mechanized battalion, which is growing with supporting units. We'll continue to grow that unit until 2030 with different assets, which is in our plans. We will, with or without NATO, we will see a lot more exercise activities and presence of different types. But let me just conclude also by saying that even though, of course, there's a lot of focus on Gotland in both in this discussion and in many other forums as well, but I would like you to put an overlay on top of Sweden on the map and realize that we have a kind of a triangular approach to security in this case, where we have one base, one part of the base at the west coast and the western approaches, the Baltic approaches, again getting in and out of the Baltic Sea, and the access to the North Sea and the North Atlantic, and of course already mentioned the Baltic Sea itself, but also the High North. And Sweden and Finland basically have interests in all three parts of that way of thinking, with or without NATO. So this is important to remember as well.
Thank you so much. Before I hand over the question, Tony, what from a Baltic perspective, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to put a bit of a pin in this bubble. When we talk about Gotland from a Baltic perspective, or when we talk about Sweden and Finland joining NATO from a Baltic perspective, we don't talk about Gotland anywhere near as much as you guys do. So I mean, I think the key point about Finland and Sweden's membership is that it plugs a geographical hole inside NATO. So NATO is now connected, contiguous, from the Atlantic through to the Baltic and from the Arctic all the way down to the Black Sea. And that gives military commanders many more options for dealing with threats. And Gotland is important in some of those scenarios, but not all of them. So yeah, it's certainly an important location. It brings Swedish and Finnish territory much closer to the Baltic states, but it's only part of a bigger picture.
Yeah, it's part of a bigger picture. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, of course, we hope that this interregnum will be very short, and perhaps only next week we'll be a member of NATO. But of course, I mean, there has to also to be a plan B to the extent that this interregnum is more substantial. And it would be interesting to hear from both sides, from Swedish side and Finnish side, what are the limitations of cooperation between Sweden and Finland in such a situation?
Thank you. General limitations between the Swedish and Finnish cooperation?
Well, basically there is no limitation in that regard. Sweden and Finland have standing defense and operational plans that we can launch if both governments agree to it any day. And I have to state very clearly, there is no plan B. There is only a plan A. We will join NATO. And then, of course, you can discuss how lengthy this period will be, but we will join NATO. And compared to many other Western nations, we do have a national operational standing plan, which is both executable and resourced. So in that regard, I mean, we already have a defense, and we have the task, and we have the mission to defend the country. With or without support from partners and allies and friends. So that's the baseline for us.
Thank you. Joachim, go ahead.
Yeah, the only challenge I see is the workload. Both Sweden and Finland, we don't have any 150 extra officers just waiting to go overseas into NATO structure. And then at the same time, we do care about the readiness, the training, exercises, the cooperation we already exist. So that might be the challenge. I don't see anything else.
How would you say that we can approach that challenge? Do you have a wish list?
Yeah, more people.
Simple as that.
Well, it's easy to say that, of course, you take care. Number one is the national defense.
Yes.
That has to be in good condition. And then you have a chance to go on supporting others in different areas. In the system which we have in Finland, which is copied from Sweden, the conscripts, a lot of conscripts every year be trained, putting into the wartime units, and that keeps our wartime strength alive. Getting more people into the defense forces, it's a long process.
It's a long process.
It's a long process.
Stefan?
Yeah, I think in January 2012, when I was defense minister, I was asked exactly that question in Zeeland for the Folk och Försvar conference in Zeeland, together with my then Swedish colleague Sten Tolgfors. How far can we go with Finnish-Swedish bilateral military cooperation? I think I quoted the former CEO of the Swedish National Bank, Bengt Dennis, in the 90s, when he, during the crisis, was asked about how high the interest can go. And he said, sky is the limit. And the same goes also for Finnish-Swedish military cooperation. That was the case in 2012. I think it's still the case. And I think that's what also the government has wanted to express in the government program, saying that we will continue to develop the Finnish-Swedish bilateral cooperation, hoping, of course, that the interregnum will be as short as possible, because NATO's defense planning will eventually, of course, concern only member states. And to a certain point, Sweden can maybe be around, but if the interregnum lasts too long, that could cause some challenges. But Sweden is, anyway, it's not a freshman in NATO context. You have been also, as we, partnership country since 1994 with enhanced opportunities. You are very close, you are engaged with NATO, but the amen in the church will be expressed later, the marriage.
Thank you so much for that.
Can I add one
Of course,
little aspect
of
on
course.
because I think it's important to understand the current situation, the interregnum, as a political issue. We are invited by NATO, and we are at most meetings. Of course, we cannot vote, but the most important message for me is that the military integration process is ongoing as we speak. It's not a pause in that regard. Of course, there will be certain aspects where we will not be fully plugged in until the decision is taken and we are ratified. But believe me, this is an ongoing process.
So that also means that when we become a full member of NATO, we will not have any military-related problems.
I'm sure there will be a lot of problems arising in the sense that there will be new challenges, and as was pointed out, the cultural aspects of joining an alliance after 200 years of being a non-aligned country, that will hit us. But from a military standpoint, I would say that, of course, there will be friction. But I'm not afraid. I know we are going to make it, and we also have a close dialogue with the Finnish military, learning from their experiences of being a new NATO member.
Yes. Okay, let me see. I think we have one question here.
Yeah, I was wondering, now that you pointed out that Sweden is already pretty prepared, and how far does the speed of actually getting admitted to NATO matter, as we are also surrounded by countries being members of NATO and having a standing army? So, and how far is it really important for Sweden and Sweden's defense to be part of NATO quickly?
If I kick off then.
Yes, sure.
I think it's utterly important, even though we do have standing forces and we feel ready to defend our country. For obvious reasons, it is also so that being on the inside of the alliance increases immediately the deterrence effect. I'm meaning the deterrence that prevents anyone, i.e. Russia, from undertaking any adventurous ideas of land grabs or creating all kinds of situations that could be of use in a strategic negotiation situation. So the deterrence factor, based on Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, is the thing, and it is really important.
Thank you so much. Tony, before I let in the other question, do you have any comments on the deterrence factor?
I think the General is absolutely right. There's nothing more difficult than having a small piece of isolated territory that somebody can take advantage of in an opportunistic way. So yeah. I would just add a kind of more positive perspective is if Sweden is not in the alliance in 2 weeks' time at the Vilnius summit, next year's summit will be in the States, and I think the political sort of signal of an American-hosted summit, a 75th anniversary summit, not including the member that everybody else wants to join, will be very difficult. I mean, I actually can't foresee it going that far. But
Thank you. Let's come back to the summit. Okay, help me out. Here you go. Yes.
Hello. Oh.
No.
I just have a simple question. Hopefully, if Sweden gets into the NATO alliance in the Vilnius summit in 2 weeks, that will, as you said, essentially complete NATO from west to east and from north to south. Would that mean an increase in NATO activity in the Baltic? And sort of follow-up question, would that mean a scale-up of NATO exercises across the entire continent?
And a follow-up question from me. Will the map change in relation to his question?
I wouldn't. No, I don't think it will change dramatically. I think that we are in for a slow pivot to the north, where the Arctic will come to play a much bigger role based on climate change, flow security, and also the fact that I would assume that Russia will have to move more focus to its core interests in the north on the Kola Peninsula. So I would claim that combining sort of the interest with North America and Northern Europe will play a role for how NATO develops in that sense. So I don't see a dramatic increase in the number of exercises or presence in the Baltic Sea. I see a more stable and a clearer pattern where we will become even more integrated into the exercise pattern and presence pattern of the alliance. But no dramatic changes or increases in that regard, unless the situation worsens.
Joachim, any comments?
Yeah, with this current situation, I don't see any growing numbers. But as General said, the nature of the exercises might change a little bit. But we do exercise quite much. I think our army chief said that the next free slot to army to come to Finland and train, it's the end of 2024. So welcome.
Stefan, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. I think NATO has no need to increase tension in the Baltic Sea region without any valid reason. It's not about demonstrating power or prestige or something like that. Everybody knows that NATO is strong enough. No need to increase activities because of that.
So no need to flex muscles.
No, I think the muscles are big enough. Everybody can see that.
Tony, any short comments?
let me, just for the sake of argument, disagree a bit. So NATO is in the situation now where it's spent the last 2 decades fighting expeditionary wars outside of Europe and is now having to relearn collective defence, to relearn those skills from 20 more years ago. And that does mean we have to practice more. That does mean we have to work together more to build or rebuild this collective defence capability. Only last week, NATO held the biggest ever Air Force deployment exercise in its history in Germany or around Germany. So I do see a case for more activity. Second aspect of it would be that, of course, we don't know how the war in Ukraine is going to end. But probably in any likely scenario, we're going to have a situation where we have an annoyed or an angry and bitter Russia still wanting to attack the West, but not having the military means to do so. And that probably means more hybrid activity in our region, more hybrid attacks on things like infrastructure. And we've seen this again in recent weeks. This has been a growing theme. And in order to deal with that, you have to have presence. You have to have ships on the sea and aircraft in the air. So I do think, I mean, I would not like to use the word militarization, but I do think we're going to see more activity in our region, in defence. So.
And would you like to add something on the map, coming back to the map? Because I think the map is very illustrative. Would you like
it's very, very pretty. I don't think I have anything particular to say about it.
No, thank you. Okay, yes, comment from the General, and then we have a question from the gentleman here. General, go ahead.
No, I was again pointing back at the map, and what we have still failed to portray is the underwater infrastructure and the features of the seabed of the Baltic Sea. And this is an area which won't necessarily require more ships per se, but a technological drive that will help us to surveil and monitor some of the seabed infrastructure that is crucial, as crucial as many of the, let's say, surface-oriented lines of communication.
Yes,
Can,
short.
can I just add one more point
short.
to what Stefan said? And this is about provocation. We worry too much about this. We have been, as Western European nations, incredibly provoked by what Russia has done over the last 18 months or so. We shouldn't worry too much about escalation.
Excellent.
You know, we should act in our interests, not in Russia's.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. That's very interesting presentations. I've heard a number of presentations at this already at this festival regarding NATO, and the point that's come up that I hadn't myself thought so much about, but it's very interesting. It's come up again today: the cultural challenges, the sort of the maybe national psychological challenges or cultural challenges. But I haven't heard a great deal of specificity about that. I'm not myself exactly sure what's meant by that. So could I ask the general and the rest of the panel, please, a little bit more specifics on how you understand those challenges? What exactly, where exactly do you see them in, I guess, Swedish society? It's curious if Finland, I guess, is a different society and maybe doesn't have quite the same challenges, but in the Swedish case. And a second question, which you've already said, you've already begun talking about Russia, which I wanted to ask about. And I would just say, can the panel offer any more insight into how NATO is gaming a possible, what a Russian reaction might be in the near future, but also in the mid and longer term? Thank you.
That's two great questions. General, if you would like to start.
Yeah, I will give you two practical examples of, let's say, these cultural issues. One would be the NATO defense planning process, which is quite a cumbersome and interesting process that will narrow the freedom of action of national defense politics. So that's a clear feature that will sort of take its grip and possibly toll on let's say the national habit on 5-year defense bills, etc., and the way they are processed, etc. So I think that will be one specific thing. Another quite I would say a little bit more philosophical issue. If you remember the NATO logo, not the North Star, but also that we are NATO. There is a tendency, and I have seen that very much in our relationship to the European Union. It's we and them. It's not us. We are NATO. We have to learn that we are a part of the alliance, and we are obliged to develop the alliance and not so contribute only, but also to develop and be the alliance. So that's two items that I would like to offer. And speaking about Russia, if I may add that too, what they have said publicly is that they will undertake military technological measures. And no one really knows what that means, but we can conclude that it means employ or deploying new weapon systems, potentially long-range weapon systems to new geography that will in some way present a clearer threat, if you wish, and a clearer presence in our vicinity. So that's basically what we can anticipate, together with posturing in general, more or less aggressively.
If I may add a short question, General, what can we do about the cultural related issues? Can we prepare for them in any way? Are we preparing, and what can we do about it?
The Swedish government agency MSB has the mission or the task from the government to inform the Swedish society, and we, the armed forces, we have a supporting role in that. So that's probably one of the clearest aspects that the government has undertaken.
That's great. Joachim, go ahead.
Yeah, thinking about the cultural chains. From the military point of view, I was trained for the first time to be the NATO staff officer around 20 years ago. So it's not so much new. But when looking at, for example, the daily routines we do have in the defense forces, we take a little bit bigger picture to see what's going on around the Finland. We do care about more, of course, the international issues, which we have to take care. We need to be prepared to send people more and more into the NATO structure. But then if I go outside from the defense forces, the Ministry of Defense, that will affect also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and different other actors in the Finland. I think we will see a lot of NATO issues discussed in the parliament soon, legislation and that kind of things. That is probably the bigger cultural change to me. The Russia, I have nothing else to add, as General said. Sorry.
And Tony, anything on the Russian perspective?
So on the Russian thing, yeah, I mean, I think it's almost inevitable that they will put more forces up in their own northwest, because they will see NATO as a risk to themselves, and particularly those submarine bastions up in the high north, are potentially very vulnerable. But and I'm sounding like a dreadful hawk here, but I'm really not. But people talk about this 1380 or 1340 kilometre border that Finland has with Russia. That's not just a risk, that's also an opportunity for us as well. There are options for us to take horizontal escalatory actions against Russian vulnerabilities in the north, should Russia wish to take hospital actions against us here in the south. So, there are more than one way of looking at these things.
Stefan, do you agree?
Yeah, I think it's. I'm not worried about the cultural issue. This is a geopolitical issue very much, because the Finnish, if you look at the borderline, the 2,320 kilometers are of course very much underlined as a NATO border now, not only a Finnish border. And if of course having 2,300 kilometer common border with Russia, it's not a funny thing, but I think it would be even worse if the border wasn't there. And the Russians really tried to remove it about 75 years ago, so fortunately they failed. But the Russians, of course, we were expecting maybe some more provocations from them during the time when before we became a full member, when the application was in. But I think the only visible thing was the same day when President Zelensky gave a video speech for the Finnish parliament, exactly the same second when he started the speech, the websites for the Ministry of Defense and the Foreign Ministry crashed. And that was no coincidence. It was a kind of way of proving the point, because we can. And of course, trying to draw the attention away from President Zelensky's speech to something else. But that's, in fact, that's basically all we have seen. So far, so good.
Thank you. I saw some more hands waving. Yes, in the back, Eric.
Thank you. Highly interesting. Can Turkey be trusted within NATO? It's one of its oldest members, but somehow you get the feeling that they play double with Russia sometimes.
Yes, who would like to start? Yes, go ahead, Tony.
We have no choice. Turkey is not going to be thrown out of the alliance, and nor should it be necessarily. This is a situation we just have to live with.
Stefan?
Well, I guess I agree. There is a saying that if you live at the riverbank, you have to be able to swim with the crocodiles. So I think that's where we are. Swimming.
On a practical level, there is a Turkish defense embassy in Stockholm. We do have the normal relationships. We do continue work together, but this is on the military level, of course.
General, let me rephrase. Can we work in a strategical and positive way with a country like Turkey?
Absolutely. I think it's a decision which has already been elaborated by our politicians when applying to join NATO, I would assume. And from a military standpoint, we have long-standing relations with Turkey, and we are definitely also upholding sort of the interrelationship with the Turkish military. And when we are at international meetings, we often have interaction and dialogue with our Turkish colleagues. So I don't see that there will be any changes to that in any regard. It's a political issue and not a military one.
That's a great statement. We have time for one more short question. Yes?
Hi, my question is that just yesterday there was news that the Hungarian parliament has delayed their vote for Sweden's accession ahead of the NATO summit. So I wanted to understand what you guys think is possibilities in the future with the Hungarian government, and do you think this problem will last, or is this something that Sweden and Finland will be able to navigate? And also another question was about what are the Swedish and Finnish perspectives on the NATO plans to expand to other regions in the world, such as the Asia Pacific. For example, their plan to open an office in Japan, because that brings in other players like China, who I would assume that Sweden and Finland would not want to provoke in any way.
Great questions. Let me add on that. What can we expect from the NATO summit? In short remarks, we have 4 minutes left. General, go ahead.
Oh my God, I can only repeat with regard to Hungary what I just said. I mean, we have a strong military-to-military relationship. The political issues have their own dynamics. Hungary is operating the Gripen system, and in that regard, our air forces are working very closely together. So again, I will refer to my political colleagues to set the scene for the continuous discussion. And in that regard, when it comes to NATO's approach to other regions, I mean, if you look into the strategic concept of the alliance, China is mentioned, and if you approach some challenges with China that could be directed towards the cyber domain or the information environment, etc., of course, the issues are global. And learning from experiences leads to contacts with Australia, Japan, South Korea, etc. So that's what I can say.
That's great. Joachim?
For Finland, as newly appointed government says, we go fully within the NATO, and the future brings something what brings. So that is.
Stefan, add on the Finnish perspective.
Well, I guess it's hard to say anything about Hungary. They have said that they won't be the last country to ratify Swedish membership. Now they're postponing, obviously, the vote to September. Do they have any information about the Turks, the timetable of the Turks, if they are postponing it to September, not wanting to be the last one? I don't know. It's just speculation, but it's a very strange situation.
Tony, any last words?
I just want to make a very small comment, and I appreciate you're not speaking in your native language, but NATO expansion, NATO enlargement, I mean, this is an unfortunate term that we're kind of stuck with. NATO expansion to other countries is about other countries exercising democratic rights to apply to join an organization for their better security. It's not NATO expanding. Similar thing with the office in Japan. I mean, this is about countries wanting to work together and work together with NATO as an organization. Because we share the same kind of interests. So this is not some kind of land grab.
Thank you, General. If we stand here in Allmänna next year, will Sweden be a full member of NATO?
Yes.
Yes. Joachim?
I would be surprised if I'm standing here in Allmänna because I'm going home end of July, but I do hope Sweden will be a member as soon as possible.
Don't you worry, maybe I will send you an invitation. Tony, what about you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as I said before, American summit or American hosted summit, that's a very difficult thing to have this kind of disagreement still going on at.
Stefan?
Yeah, I'm quite convinced that that's going to be the case. Sweden is a member country, and Finland will do anything that we can to promote it, of course.
That's great. Time flies with interesting discussions. I would like to start by saying thank you so much to this distinguished panel. A warm applause. And on behalf of Hanaholmen and Swedish Defence Association, I would like to thank all of you for taking part of this discussion, and have a continued great stay in Almedalen.
Thank you.